A man in a white baseball cap stands beside a row of payphones in a small airport. To everyone walking past, he looks like a tired traveler waiting on a call. He is not waiting on a call. He is waiting on a plane. And in the next 90 seconds, with every television camera in the building pointed at a doorway 30 feet away, he is going to reach into his boot and end the life of the man who kidnapped his 11-year-old son. Across an ocean and a few years earlier, a mother in a pale raincoat walks into a courtroom in West Germany. The guards see a grieving woman and wave her through. They do not see the pistol under the coat, the one she has been practicing with, alone, in a basement, for almost a year. And on an ordinary Saturday, in rural Texas, a father at a backyard grill hears his 5-year-old daughter scream from inside a barn. He runs toward the sound with nothing in his hands. The man inside that barn does not walk back out. 5 parents. 5 moments where the law moved too slowly, or moved the wrong way, or never moved at all. 5 ordinary mothers and fathers who reached a single point where they decided they would not wait one more day for a system that had already failed them. Some walked free. One was hunted down for it. And by the end, you are going to be asking yourself the same question millions of people have argued over for more than 40 years. Not whether these parents were right. The harder question underneath that one: what would you have done? This is Dark Truth Crime, the channel that goes where others won't and keeps the facts intact while doing it. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button before we start. And if you already know you are staying to the end, drop one word in the comments right now. Say ready, so I know who is here for the whole thing. One honest warning first. Every story you are about to hear is real, drawn from court records and reporting, and reconstructed only for clarity. Several of these cases involve the abuse of children, and that abuse will be described only as far as it must be. Only enough to understand why a parent did what they did, and not one word more. Nothing in this video celebrates or encourages anyone to take the law into their own hands. It exists to ask, honestly, what happens at the place where a family's grief collides with a justice system that failed them? That father at the payphones is where we begin. Case 1. Gary Plache and Jeffrey Doucet. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1984. 2 years before that airport, there was a karate studio in Baton Rouge and a 25-year-old instructor named Jeffrey Doucet, whom everyone trusted, patient, encouraging, the kind of coach who remembered birthdays and made nervous kids feel like they belonged. Parents dropped their sons off without a second thought. That was the entire point. One of those boys was 11-year-old Jody Plache. Jody's parents, Gary and June, were separating, and Doucet had a talent for making himself useful to families already stretched thin. He offered to drive Jody to practice and back. What no one could see was the slow, deliberate work underneath that kindness. The patient grooming investigators recognize again and again in predators who operate from inside a position of trust. It escalated over the better part of a year, completely hidden from 2 parents who believed their son was safe. On the 14th of February, 1984, Doucet said he was taking Jody for a short drive. He never brought him back. He drove the boy across state lines to California, disguised him, and held him in a motel room for 10 days. During those 10 days, he abused him. Back in Louisiana, the disappearance exploded into a nationwide search. June spent 10 days not knowing if her son was alive. Then a collect call came through. Jody's voice, telling his mother he was safe in California. A minute in, the voice changed. It was Doucet, telling June to gather her other children and come west the next morning. What he did not know was that the FBI had tapped the family's line, and a deputy had heard every word. Police traced the call to the motel and arrested Doucet on the 29th of February. Jody flew home the next day. Doucet was charged with aggravated kidnapping and held in California while extradition ground through the system. On the 16th of March, 1984, he was flown back to Louisiana for trial. Earlier that same day, Gary Plache happened to learn from a television contact exactly when and where Doucet would be walked through the airport in handcuffs. Gary went home, took a small revolver, slid it into his boot, and drove to the terminal. When deputies walked Doucet through, every camera locked onto the handcuffed man. Nobody watched the figure in the white cap by the phones. Gary had a longtime friend on the line, just to hear something normal. "Here he comes," he said quietly. "You're about to hear a shot." As Doucet passed within a few feet, Gary turned, drew, and fired once. A deputy who knew the family wrapped him up against the phones, asking it over and over. "Why, Gary? Why?" And the answer, caught on tape, was as simple as a human answer gets. If somebody did that to your kid, you'd do it too. Doucet died the next morning. Gary pleaded no contest to manslaughter. The judge concluded prison would serve no one and handed down 7 years suspended, 5 years probation, and 300 hours of community service. The public did not see a killer in that footage. They saw a father. And here is the part the 30-second version erases. Jody grew up, became a sexual assault counselor, and wrote a memoir, forgiving Doucette and never once saying his father was wrong. But he has also returned, in public, to one hard truth. His father used to say flatly that if anyone ever touched his son, he would kill them, and Jody knew he wasn't bluffing. That, Jody believes, is part of why he stayed silent while the abuse was happening. He was terrified of exactly what his father would eventually do. Sit with that. A father's rage saved his son in the worst moment of that boy's life, and that same rage may be part of why the boy felt he couldn't speak up sooner. It is the first time you'll see the real pattern of this video. The violence was almost never the first response. It was what came after the long, grinding wait. Tell me in the comments, did the judge get it right? Because the next case is this one's darker twin, and that mother waited even longer. Case 2. Marianne Bachmeier and Klaus Grabowski Lübeck, West Germany, 1981. If Gary Plauché gave America its most replayed piece of vigilante footage, this is the German counterpart, and the harder of the two to sit with, because of how long this mother lived inside her plan before she carried it out. Marianne Bachmeier ran a pub in the port city of Lübeck, raising her youngest daughter Anna, largely alone. On the 5th of May, 1980, after an argument with her mother, 7-year-old Anna skipped school and went, as she had before, to a neighbor who kept kittens. That neighbor was a 35-year-old butcher named Klaus Grabowski. Grabowski was already known to the courts, with prior convictions for assaulting young girls. In 1976, he had undergone a voluntary medical procedure presented to the public as a permanent safeguard. But here is the detail almost no one around him knew. He had since received hormone treatment that effectively undid it. In every functional sense, he was exactly the danger he had always been, living one door down from a little girl who liked his kittens. That morning, Grabowski held Anna for hours, assaulted her, and killed her. He was identified after his own fiancée went to police. He confessed. His trial opened on the 4th of March, 1981. Now the part the simplified retellings erase. Marianne did not snap in a single courtroom instant. According to a friend who later spoke to a documentary crew, she spent nearly a year quietly preparing. She acquired a pistol and rehearsed the draw and the shot alone in the basement beneath her bar, over and over. On the third day of trial, the 6th of March, she walked into the courtroom in a pale raincoat, with the pistol hidden beneath it. Moved by sympathy for a grieving mother, security never searched her. What tipped her over the edge, by her own account, was what Grabowski said in his own defense, denying the killing and making an obscene, contemptible claim about the dead 7-year-old. It appears to have been the last thing she could stand to hear. With his back to her, she drew and fired. He died on the courtroom floor. Afterward, witnesses said, she carried no remorse. She told the court she had wanted him dead. Her trial split West Germany almost exactly in half, some calling her the only justice the state had been willing to deliver, others warning that the moment a grieving individual can execute a defendant mid-trial, the presumption of innocence begins to collapse, however sympathetic the shooter. And here is the thread that ties this whole video together, surfacing for the first time. The debate widened to the institutions that handled Grabowski. The safeguard had been sold as permanent. The treatment that reversed it was never adequately explained by anyone. Her own lawyers argued part of the blame for Anna's death belonged to whoever signed off on that reversal. It produced no accountability, but it lingered in German debate for years. Hold on to that, a system enabling the very harm that later breaks apparent. Marianne was convicted of manslaughter and a weapons offense, sentenced to 6 years, and served just over 3. She never once faked a remorse she did not feel. She died in September of 1996, at 46, and was buried beside Anna, mother and daughter back in the ground together, the way they had once been together behind the bar of a small pub neither would see again. The next case strips everything down to its rawest possible form. No bond, no trial, no warrant. Just a scream, a barn, and a father with empty hands. Case 3. The Anonymous Father, and Jesus Mora Flores, Lavaca County, Texas, 2012. An ordinary Saturday on a rural Texas property. Food on the grill. Children loose in the yard. Adults talking about nothing in particular, the way people do on an afternoon when nothing bad has ever happened there before. A 23-year-old father was living exactly that afternoon, his 5-year-old daughter playing somewhere nearby. Everything was fine, right up until the moment he heard her scream. He ran toward the sound. It led him to a barn at the edge of the property, and what was inside stopped the world. A 47-year-old ranch hand named Jesus Mora Flores was sexually assaulting the little girl. The father had no weapon. He did not go find one. He pulled Flores off his daughter with his bare hands and struck him the way any parent in that exact second would, with everything his body had. and he did not stop until the man stopped moving. And then the adrenaline broke, and the silence hit as hard as the scream had. He stepped back, picked up his phone, and called for help. People who have heard that emergency call describe it as some of the hardest audio connected to any case like this. He was not calm. He was begging the dispatcher to send an ambulance. His voice was coming apart. He did not want Flores to die. He wanted someone to come and save the life of the man he had just stopped. Flores was pronounced dead at the scene. The county grand jury reviewed everything and declined to indict. No charges at all. Under Texas law, the use of deadly force is explicitly permitted to stop a sexual assault in progress. And 12 ordinary citizens looked at the facts of that barn and decided, unanimously, that this father had done nothing criminal. His name was never released, deliberately withheld to protect his daughter's identity. He remains anonymous to this day, somewhere in Texas, living a life split forever into a before and an after, by what happened on a Saturday that started like any other. People did not need a law degree to understand the grand jury's reasoning. They understood it the way the father did, in the space of one scream. Comment and tell me where this one lands for you, because the next case leaves the courtroom entirely for one of the most dangerous places on earth. Case 4. Miriam Rodriguez Martinez, and the Zetas Cartel. Tamaulipas, Mexico, 2014 to 2017. Some parents here acted in one explosive instant. Miriam Rodriguez Martinez spent 3 years doing something no instinct alone can sustain, turning her grief into a one-woman intelligence operation against one of the most violent criminal networks in the Western Hemisphere. In 2014, in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas, her daughter Karen was kidnapped by members of the Zetas Cartel. The family did exactly what is demanded. They paid the ransom in full, every peso, complying with every instruction, trusting that cooperation was the only road that brought their daughter home. The cartel killed her anyway. Miriam went to the authorities and cooperated fully. But in cartel-controlled regions, these investigations stall, buried under intimidation, corruption, and the sheer powerlessness of local police, facing an organization with more money, more weapons, and more willingness to kill than they have. She watched that stall happen in real time, and then she made a decision almost no one in her grief would dare follow through on. She would find the people responsible herself. She did not hire investigators. She became one. Over the following years, she adopted disguises and built false identities to get close to people connected to the network that had taken Karen. She ran her own surveillance, in a place where knowing too much about the wrong person can get you killed without warning. One by one, completely alone, she located people connected to her daughter's kidnapping and murder. And one by one, she handed their names and locations straight to the Mexican federal authorities. By the end, Miriam had personally helped track down around 10 members of the cell responsible for Karen's death. People who later studied her story described her methods as closer to professional fieldcraft than to grief. She learned to read a neighborhood like a trained operative, who came and went from which houses, which cars appeared on which days, which low-level associates might be frightened, into giving up what she needed. She did this where intimidation had silenced far more experienced investigators, where police were too often compromised or simply too afraid. No badge protected her. No institution had her back. She had only the conviction that doing nothing was unacceptable. On Mother's Day in 2017, Miriam was at home in San Fernando, still recovering from an injury suffered during one of her surveillance operations, when armed men arrived at her door. She was shot many times and died before she could reach a hospital. Mexico mourned her loudly, and her story crossed borders. Here was a woman who walked deliberately and repeatedly into the heart of one of the deadliest networks on the planet, armed with nothing but disguises, patience, and a refusal to let her daughter's killers dissolve back into the dark the way the system was content to let them. She did what hollowed-out institutions could not. And in the end, the cartel did what cartels do to anyone who becomes a lasting problem. She was buried in the same country that failed to protect her daughter, and then failed to protect her. But she found around 10 of them, and every one of those names sits in an official record today, because one mother decided grief would not be where the story ended. The last case sits at the dead center of every question this video has raised, and pushes it louder than anything before it. Case 5. Christian and Alejandro Trevino, and Gabriel Quintanilla, Texas, 2022. Christian Trevino was 18 years old. His younger half-brother, Alejandro, was 17. They heard what their 9-year-old half-sister told them about a man named Gabriel Quintanilla, and they processed it the way two teenage brothers process that kind of disclosure about a little girl they love. They went looking for him. What turned this into a national story, before a single punch was thrown, surfaced once police pulled the records. Quintanilla already had an active, outstanding warrant, and not a minor one. It was a warrant for a serious sexual offense against a child, from a completely separate case dating back years. He had been walking around Texas all that time with that warrant attached to his name. and no one in the system had ever come to collect him. The brothers confronted him. A fight broke out. He fled. They pursued him. There was more than one confrontation. By the end, Quintanilla was dead of his injuries. Christian and Alejandro were arrested and charged, and the case spread online with an intensity almost unmatched for a local Texas case in years. A petition calling for the brothers to be released and the charges dropped gathered close to 500,000 signatures. People could not get past one infuriating fact. The system already knew exactly who Gabriel Quintanilla was, and had simply never found him. Two teenage brothers found him in a single afternoon. Christian ultimately received a sentence measured in years. Alejandro's charges were dropped entirely. And this is where every tension in this video collides at once. Two brothers heard their 9-year-old sister describe what was being done to her. The man responsible already carried an active warrant for doing the same thing to another child years earlier, a warrant the state had failed to act on. They found him in an afternoon. One of them is serving time for it. The other came home. Their sister is alive. The man who hurt her is not. Texas drew one conclusion. Nearly 500,000 people drew the opposite. Step back from these 5 stories, and a shape that hides when you look at them one at a time finally comes into focus. First, how rarely any of this happened on impulse. Gary Plauché waited a month, through an arrest and an extradition. Marianne Bachmeier waited nearly a year, practicing alone in a basement. Almost every time, the violence was not the first response to the abuse. It was what came after a parent had already watched the ordinary process stall, fail, or move too slowly to keep pace with their fear. Second, how often the system's own machinery enabled the harm in the first place. Doucet was never flagged before being handed access to children. Grabowski's safeguard was quietly reversed. Quintanilla's warrant sat unenforced for years. These were not failures of one officer's compassion. They were structural gaps, the kind that exist quietly inside any large institution. And every one of these families ended up living inside one. And third, how rarely the aftermath ever ends clean. Jody Plauché has spent decades insisting the same intensity that saved him may also be part of what silenced him. Miriam Rodriguez found her daughter's killers and was killed for it. Justice, in these stories, almost never arrived as one clean resolution. It arrived as a trade, and someone in nearly every family was left paying for it. 5 parents, different countries, different decades, wildly different outcomes. What separates the parent who got probation from the parent who lost everything is again and again almost never the depth of what was done to their child. It is timing. It is jurisdiction. It is the wording of a statute. That is not comfortable, and this channel is not going to pretend otherwise. If this made you think, or made you angry, or made you ask yourself the question we opened with, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. So finish the sentence honestly, down in the comments. Type 1 would have, and then tell the rest of us where you land, because everyone else watching wants to know too. If you believe this story deserves to reach more people, hit that like button, and if you want to be here when we open the next case, subscribe to Dark Truth Crime, and we will see you in the next one.